Well, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of All Out War. I'm Turner, and I'm joined in the studio with Rosie.
Hey,
What's up, man?
you were doing a real cool, sexy slide voice.
I was trying to do that late night radio host voice. You're listening to K-Jazz.
K-Jazz.
Coming up, we got Kenny G. Kenny G and the Funky Bunch.
Wait, was it? I recently re-listened to Kanye West's first gospel album.
Yeah.
That he came out with, which is so good. But there's a song where all of a sudden he just has a Kenny G solo in it, and it was so awesome. Like,
I do remember that. Yeah. Kenny G's awesome.
Yeah,
man.
I think it was on the song "Use This Gospel." But
Oh, cool.
yeah.
So, what do you know, man?
Hey, did you know? Did you know what the Cinco de Mayo is in celebration of?
I think I used to actually know what that was.
Okay, well, how about this? Did you know that the Cinco de Mayo commemorates the newly independent country of Mexico's victory over the French at the Battle of Pueblo, which meant that the French could not enter the Civil War on the side of the Confederacy.
Ah,
So how about this?
interesting.
How Cinco de Mayo helped prevent a Confederate victory in the Civil War. It says Cinco de Mayo actually marks the unlikely defeat of elite French forces by an undermanned Mexican army in the Battle of Puebla, Pueblex, now with Latinx.
Publix.
Publix down in
The
Florida.
grocery store. Latinx, Publix.
Pueblex on May 5th, 1862. In fact, this underdog Mexican victory may have played a part in preventing French Emperor Napoleon III from helping the Confederacy during the American Civil War.
You know how they celebrated? They stacked up their sombreros.
I'm happy it got you like 5 hours later. Imagine if we did the entire episode.
No, we can't. That's an inside joke. I hate laughing.
That's a perfect encapsulation of what this episode was about. So you're crying.
I'm literally crying. Just so for the listener, you read something to me, and it's not appropriate for the air. It was just in between you and me. But the punchline was they stacked up their sombreros. So as you were reading this, it made me think about that. I was trying not to laugh while you were reading it. Anyways.
Yeah. So this episode is pretty interesting, and it came out on a spur of the moment. We explained the rest on the other side. So
Of the intro.
why don't you sit? I ruined it.
You can't even say
I
it.
can't say it. Oh.
It's sit back, grab a coffee, and enjoy.
You're listening to the All Out War podcast.
What's up, everybody? That was like a quick. I didn't realize the intro music was done.
I meant to say something to you, and then I thought you were gonna pause it, and then that's why I had that had to take that puff of nicotine.
Oh, oh man. So we got to do some explaining here.
Yeah.
We were going to do an episode on one thing. I'm just going to leave it at that, on one thing. And then as we kind of got into it, we were looking at it there and we realized maybe not. And so, and then it became like, well, you came over to record and we only record once a week. And it's not easy to do this because
You're busy, I'm busy.
yeah, and there's just a lot of time involved. And so we were talking about different things that we're interested in right now, and I was kind of like halfway under the opinion we were just going to not record at all.
That's what I was thinking too.
Kind of writing it up as a loss. I was bummed, but I got to hang out with you.
Yeah.
And then we started talking about one specific thing, and that drove me to pull out a book, and I was reading about that one specific thing.
And then we started
rabbit trailing. So we this is actually a good conversation. Let's record it.
Yeah.
So we're going to try and recap what you and I have been talking about over the last hour.
Not all of it, but most of the things.
Yeah, some of it.
What's so funny is, and this is kind of like my prayer or hope for this podcast.
Yeah.
Is so. How about I'll say this to listeners? We hope that this comes across in some sort of. We prayed before the podcast. We pray before every podcast.
Yeah.
Before we hit record, that God guides our words and guides the conversation or guides just the podcast in general as to some sort of point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because like when you were saying just now of trying to recap what we were originally talking about, we were originally talking about something so
Right.
outside of what this ended up being, but at the same time, it flowed very naturally, at least in the conversation we were going into. And then, yeah, like you said, you pulled out a book, you read something, and all of a sudden, that triggered something else, and we had like a little mini research for like an hour, like trying to find stuff like, does this all make sense? Is this even worth to bring up as a podcast? Can we make it work into a podcast?
Yeah, right.
And I think it does. But I will preface this by saying this is all to say, hang with us, listener.
I think it's going to go better than that.
Okay.
But it is on the fly.
Yeah.
It literally is on the fly. It came on the fly. And then now we're going to talk about it. So
it's funny because there's a couple different points that we're going to get into that I never thought that we were going to go the way that we did, but it's so crazy and it's so cool that it ends up like I kind of think of as three different topics that we're talking about.
But they
and
do
it
connect.
ties so much into even more than what we're just talking about. It goes into some other stuff we've been talking about. So anyway, yeah.
So all right. So the question we were you and I were the topic of the 144,000 came up, and this is in reference to Revelation chapter 7. So I'm just going to read this brief section of Revelation, and then I'll go into it a little bit more.
Yeah.
So out of Revelation chapter 7, verses 1 through 8, this is what it says. It says, "After this I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind should blow on the earth, or on the sea, or upon any of the trees. And I saw another angel ascend from the sun rising, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a great voice to the 4 angels to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we shall have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of them that were sealed, 144,000, sealed out of every tribe of the children of Israel." Mm-hmm. And then it goes into each one of the tribes. So it says, of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000. And it goes Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. And it says, so there was 12,000 from each of those tribes.
Yeah.
And then I was like, so then that spurred me to think about, well, the tribes are different. Like there's something.
Those are not like the historical 12 tribes of Israel.
Yeah, and because typically, for me, the one that struck me was Joseph. Normally, Joseph isn't named as one of the 12 tribes because he named his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, to replace. So usually Joseph is sort of the patriarch over Manasseh and Ephraim, and Manasseh and Ephraim, and he gave them his portion because he stayed back in Egypt. Remember, he was buried in Egypt. He didn't leave with them.
Yeah. How about before you go into that too?
Yeah.
Just kind of take a step back in case anyone's unfamiliar.
Yeah.
Where do the 12 tribes come from, aside from Joseph? Like, where did the other ones?
So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Right? Jacob has 12 sons. Those are where the 12 tribes come from. So they're from the lineage of the genealogy of Abraham. And each of them were apportioned a plot of land in the promised land. They were given a piece of the land. And so what brought this up was, as you and I often talk about, the Antichrist, right?
Yeah.
We are often in discussion about it. And you should be too. I mean, come on. Look at the day and age we live in. But we were talking about Dan isn't represented here. And I was like, I read somewhere that Dan was taken out or not included because of like they went into idolatry, like the first when they went into before they were in Promised Land or something like that. And I couldn't remember what it was. And then you pulled up a letter from one of the church fathers. And you speculated I think the Antichrist is going to come from Dan.
Right. Right. Well, do you want to read the rest of that kind of explains it, or do you want me to go ahead and start?
I'll just read a little bit real quick here. It just says, and this is coming from a book called The Footsteps of the Messiah, and it's by a guy named Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, and he's a Jewish believer, a Messianic Jew, I guess is what people would know them as. He's a Christian who, and it says that this passage describes the third of the 5 events happening throughout the first half of the tribulation. This ministry of the 144,000 is something that occurs throughout the entire first half and not merely after the 6th seal judgment. In fact, it is going on during the seal judgments, and this means by which the 5th seal saints come to Messiah. The passage begins with "after this," which is not chronological, but merely the next vision that John sees. And so then he goes into the angels and what the meaning of the angels were and all those kind of things. And so it just kind of goes into that. But he has a thing here. Dr. Fruchtenbaum says this. It says just as he starts talking about the tribes. So let me read that real quick. In verses 4 through 8, the identification of those who are sealed is clearly specified as 144,000 Jews. To make it even more clear, 12 tribes are listed with the statements that 12,000 are chosen from each of the 12 tribes. Such careful delineation definitely indicates that these 144,000 are Jews and will be nothing else, in spite of much speculation on the contrary. The emphasis is on the Jewishness of the 144,000. Looking at this list of tribal names, some have concluded that the tribe of Ephraim is left out, but this is not the case. In place of the name Ephraim, there is the name of his father, Joseph. But it is the same tribe, such as an interchange between Joseph and Ephraim. It is not unusual and also appears elsewhere, as in Ezekiel 37, verse 16. But one tribe is left out, namely the tribe of Dan. No reason for this is given. The great deal of speculation and guesswork has developed, and this is where you and I got into our conversation. A great deal of speculation and guesswork has developed as a result, mainly the idea that the Antichrist will come out of this tribe. But this has already been dealt with earlier. Other claims that the false prophet will arise out of the tribe of Dan, and that is why the tribe is left out. But this too is pure speculation. There is nothing in the context to suggest either of these suppositions. The text itself does not state the reason why the tribe of Dan is left out. The actual reason is simply to maintain the symmetry of the 12. When all the tribal names are actually listed, the total comes to 13 and not 12 because Joseph produced 2 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, which is what I was just talking about. In order to maintain the symmetry of the 12, one name must always be dropped. This is not the only place that this happens. For example, in Deuteronomy 33, Moses presents his 12 tribal blessings as Jacob did in Genesis 49. But to maintain the symmetry of the 12, Moses also had to drop one tribe, and that was the tribe of Simeon. In Ezekiel 47 and 48, in describing the tribal sentiment or settlement of the Messianic kingdom, in the Messianic kingdom, to maintain the symmetry of the 12, Ezekiel drops the tribe of Levi, putting this tribe in a separate place and category. Just as there is no sinister reason for dropping Simeon, there is no sinister reason for dropping Dan. I do have one commentary, though.
Yeah.
When Moses is using Genesis 49 as his reference, because you got to remember, this is so Deuteronomy 33 is the Song of Moses. It's when it's his last kind of before they go into the Promised Land, before he's going to die. Because remember, he doesn't go into the Promised Land, so it's like his last kind of testament or will, and he sings a song as well. And in Deuteronomy 33, he doesn't mention. He speaks of what Abraham did, but you got to remember, Joseph came after that, right? So Abraham wouldn't know Joseph. He would have known Benjamin, because he would have known his great-grandson,
right,
Benjamin, but he wouldn't have known Joseph because Joseph was the one who was sold in.
When they were already in captivity.
Right. He thought he was dead. So why would he name his dead son, or his dead grandson, whatever? Anyways, I thought that was interesting, and it seems to get convoluted to me.
Right. Yeah. And what kind of sparked an interesting conversation that even brought us to the whole talking about the 144,000.
Yeah.
Was we were speculating, having a conversation about in Revelation, or actually, there's a couple of places. Is it Ezekiel? I think is where it actually says. Regardless, I'm trying to think of which individual verse that we were talking about, where all of the Jews will come back to Israel, and then the whole world will turn against them. And then we were talking about if there was any kind of good thing, because there's the 144,000 that will be all Jews, that will come from all the different tribes.
Yeah.
We were kind of speculating, is there any purpose or any advantage to those 12,000 being found out by the Antichrist beforehand?
So, well, the big question was like, how? There's no way for, like, if you're a Jew today, there's no way for you to tell what tribe you came from. Right. When they went into captivity in Babylon, all that stuff was basically erased. It was like destroyed. The records were destroyed. And also most of the records were destroyed when before Rome occupied as well. So Babylon destroyed a temple, and then
70 AD, and then
Rome did that.
Sorry.
Yeah, so that would have been Romans who did that, but Babylon destroyed it too, the first temple. So then you have this whole. Well, how do I know what tribe I came from? And you and I were talking about, like, how are they going to know that these 12,000 virgin males are from the tribe of Benjamin or from Levi or from, whatever, and that it talks about in Revelation chapter 7. And we were speculating. I said, well, maybe they'll find some document, Babylonian document that will actually be able to somehow link it to their lineage, right? Based on name or something like that. And then we started getting really sci-fi, and we were like, well, maybe there's a genetic way that they'll discover like 12 variations of a simple. This is all speculation, right?
Yeah,
we have no proof of this. There's no scientific evidence.
This was us talking out of our butts and going, kind of pulling a Joe Rogan, like, dude,
what if?
What if?
Right.
Like,
except without getting high.
Yeah. Again, if you ever hear me taking a hit, it's my nicotine.
It is.
Everyone knows I'm in recovery. That was the one vice I've never given up, and I don't want to.
Yeah. You've been sober, what, 12 years?
12 and a half.
12 and a half years, yeah. So
I'm keeping my nicotine. I need it going. I don't drink coffee.
Yeah.
Coke Zero nicotine.
Yeah. And I can attest to that. I can be his witness to verify. Anyways, what if there was a genetic? What if they could scientifically, genetically figure out, okay, we see these variations, and if you have this, you submit your DNA.
And that's what I posited is, what if these DNA databases, like, we all know that this is pretty normie tier, like, I think it's like some person from the Senate Intelligence Committee came out like a couple months ago, and he was like, don't give your DNA to these people because they're using it to like build biological weapons
Specific to
individual people. So that's not even normie tier. That's just everyone. That's
it's
open
common
now,
knowledge now.
that China's stealing DNA from people. But I asked, would there be the conspiracy, quote unquote, tier with maybe the Antichrist system, or the people that are being used by the Antichrist or possessed, or, these Satanists are an underlying reasoning for creating all these database testing things is to find the actual tribes. And, and that's why I said, is there some way that these 12,000, like if the Antichrist could kill the 12,000 people from maybe even one, maybe if he just kills wipes out an entire tribe, wipes out half a tribe of one specific tribe, maybe therefore he would think that like, these 144,000 will not be able to fulfill the purpose that God has for them. So therefore,
dude,
go ahead.
I just thought of something.
Okay.
That's a tactic Satan's used.
Right.
Several times. When Jesus was born, he tried to. Herod was tempted to go and kill all the little boys under 2 years old or whatever, and so he tried to exterminate all the boys because he wanted to kill the Messiah. When Moses was born, he had to be hidden in the Pharaoh's temple, and he was adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter on a basket because he went down the river in a basket because the Pharaoh didn't like the way the Jews were growing in number and wanted to cut their numbers. And so it's a tactic that's been used, but maybe this one, instead of just being like the ones already born that are just male or whatever, we're going to go after genetically. We're going to pop the hood on their DNA and see what makeup is and see how we can figure out which tribes are from what genetic makeup is from what tribe.
Right.
If this is true, you and I are not only are we prophetic, we need to write a book about this or a movie. There's probably already something written about this.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, the thinking on this can't be too far deep.
Yeah. But what was my questioning behind that was, is there any way, let me take a step back, because the thinking is Satan is not dumb. He even the Bible says that the demons, can quote scripture. Satan, he was there. He's not an atheist. Yeah. He believes in God. He knows God.
Oh yeah.
Because he's rebelling against something, right?
Right.
So he knows he's going to lose, but we've talked about this. This is not groundbreaking by any means. But if he can slow the destruction by knowing that there's specific things that God gave us to look forward to know if all these things are happening. Oh, Jesus, said to, pay attention to these things, the rumors of wars and all these things. The birthing pains,
the signs of the
times. Yeah. So Satan is he's still king of this world right now. So he wants to elongate, expand, make his rule last as long as he can until he is ultimately defeated. And he's probably deceived to thinking that he can defeat God. Right.
He tried to rebel once and was evicted.
Right. Yeah.
So, and led a rebellion.
Right.
So.
And then you brought up the whole other point which is kind of like moot to the point that I was going at, is these 12,000 are virgin males who can't be killed. So,
right. And I think if I'm not mistaken, they can call down fire from heaven. It's either them or the two witnesses.
I can't remember.
Maybe both.
Yeah.
I'll have to go look.
But anyway, so that's kind of where the conversation started. We're talking about these weird things. And so I'm trying to do kind of more of a not rough transition to the point about Dan, that Dr. Fruchtbaum, or whatever his name was.
Fruchtenbaum, yeah.
Fruchtenbaum. He pointed out that this idea about Dan not being listed actually is not like a new... I'll take a step back and say this too. Maybe throw some digs at people. You know, all of this stuff that we're talking about is thrown into a premillennial, pre-tribulation, dispensational idea.
Yeah.
So if you want to call us stupid premill dispies or whatever, like I understand.
I'm going to get a T-shirt that says "I'm a stupid premill dispy."
Anyways, so that's what I was saying is this is all under that presupposition that is all happening. I completely.
So we were because of that theology, the Dan thing isn't not new.
Oh yes, sorry. So what I was going to say is one of these things that people like to point at about premillennial dispensationalism is, you know, the Schofield Reference Bible, that, you know, the reason that Dan isn't listed there, that's because this is some crazy interpretation by a very new interpretation because of the Schofield Reference Bible.
Or Darby.
Or Darbyism. Or that's a new invention. And so us reading into Dan being, you know, the birth tribe of the Antichrist, that's all a new invention because premill dispensationalism is new.
But Fruchtenbaum's a dispensational premill guy.
Right.
But he's poo-pooing it.
Right.
But we've popped the hood a little bit, dug a little bit, and we found something very interesting.
Exactly. So
and it was
smoking that sticky green stuff.
Call a crackhead.
That's what they think we are.
How are you, baby?
I'm doing good.
I had to get those out.
I got my hairy legs.
That's right.
Anyways, so I found this academic article, putting my Michael Heiser hat on.
There you go.
From the Journal of Theological Studies, put out by Oxford University, and it's called Antichrist from the Tribe of Dan.
But it's from Oxford.
Yeah.
What do they know?
Right. And so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I'm going to just introduce this idea because this really encapsulates the beginning, and then I'm going to go into it. So the abstract is the continued Jewish expectation of a Messiah after Jesus came was interpreted by the Christians in the 2nd century of Christianity as a foreboding of the coming of the Antichrist. Irenaeus, and we'll just take a step back. Irenaeus is one of the earliest church fathers. Mm-hmm. He was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John.
Yes. But you told me something I didn't know, that Irenaeus actually remembers seeing John, meeting him.
Yeah, Ken was talking about that. He made some. I don't
know how I missed that.
I found out on that when I was listening to Ken talk about before, but I remember bringing it up to him. So Irenaeus basically had made when he was talking to people and in some of his writings. So he wrote this huge book series of writings. It's called Against Heresies. Mm-hmm. So he was just laying it down, slapping against Gnosticism. He was really big into anti-Gnosticism that was already creeping into the church when John was still alive.
Yeah.
But he had made comments, or he had wrote that he would say like, oh yeah, I'm paraphrasing. He's not going to talk like this. But basically, I'm hanging out with Polycarp, and then all of a sudden, the old man comes over, and I asked him, hey, what did you mean when you saw this, when you wrote this? And then John says, oh, thanks for asking. This is what I saw. This is what it means.
Can you imagine? First of all, that would be incredible. Like, I wonder if he realized he was, like, I know he knew he knew who he was talking to was the
Yeah.
Apostle John, who had been with Jesus, and
I would imagine that he very much understood like the weight and the heft, and I mean
Yeah.
that's why he wrote a whole series against heresies.
right,
Like,
yeah. But this is when he was younger, though, when he would
Right,
meet
right,
John,
right.
the old man.
Right.
Probably his skin was all because he had been dipped in oil.
Right, and burned, yeah. But yeah, so not to say that obviously we don't place what Irenaeus says on
Right.
like equal footing of the canon of Scripture.
Correct.
We are not saying anything like that, but it's important to keep in mind when someone like Irenaeus, who learned from Polycarp, and even though Irenaeus was young when John was still alive, Polycarp was with John for a long time.
Yeah, until he died.
Years.
Yeah, until
So he
John died. Yeah,
studied underneath him directly.
he was the first disciple of
Right.
John.
So it is a big deal
Yeah.
of what Irenaeus said. And especially when we're talking about end time stuff, again, there's no one better than Irenaeus, Polycarp,
Right.
that to find out what John saw and what he meant. So,
And I guess the point of it is just that what did the church fathers believe,
right,
and what's being taught today.
right.
And that's always like my second or third go-to. Like first I read the scriptures, like, okay, what does the scriptures say about it? Then I start to read what did the church fathers believe about it, because they're the closest to the original writings of those letters. And then I read more current stuff after that. But for me, as I'm trying to like unpack something, like I had a question about Synagogue of Satan. I never really studied that too much.
Yeah.
Started digging in. That's what actually brought up this Fruchtenbaum book.
Yeah, because you had the book open on your desk before I was here.
Because I was this morning.
Serendipitous.
This earlier today I was using it.
But anyway, so just wanted to reiterate that before we go into this. So the continued Jewish expectation of a Messiah after Jesus came was interpreted by the Christians in the 2nd century of Christianity as a foreboding of the coming of an Antichrist. Irenaeus, the first writer to refer to a Jewish Antichrist, found support for this foreboding in Jeremiah 8:16 and Revelations 7:5-7, which seem to indicate that the Antichrist will come from the tribe of Dan.
What was it, Jeremiah 8:16?
Yeah.
I'm just going to pull it up real quick because
Yeah.
I want to read it.
And I do want to say when we go into this, which is very interesting, I'm not sure if we've actually talked about this yet, but I'm not sure if, I can't remember if RL was talking about it. Go ahead. I'll finish my thought.
Okay.
Is that in, obviously the Jews rejected Christ as their Messiah. They were looking for a different kind of Messiah. They interpreted it differently. And they do actually, the current, Jews, you ask a Jew, their Messiah that they're currently waiting on actually is what we describe as the Antichrist. They are in alignment.
Yeah. So basically, because Christ came, they rejected him. Now the Messiah that they're going to wait for is going to be a worldly leader.
Right.
A political leader. That's what they've always been,
Right.
kind of. So Jeremiah 8:16 says, "The snorting of the enemy's horses is heard from Dan."
Yeah.
Oh, there's more. "And the neighing of their stallions, the whole land trembles." So basically it's here, let me read more. It says,
sure.
"The snorting of the enemy's horses has heard from Dan, and the neighing of their stallions, the whole land trembles. They have come to devour the land and everything in it, the city and all who live there." So that would be because it specifically talks about the horses of the enemy from Dan.
Right.
I never, I read that before, and I just thought that was where they came from.
Right.
Not that they were sent by. Sent
It's
by
interesting.
Dan.
Yeah. I mean, that's just to kind of take use that as a perfect example. It's always so interesting, and I love it every time I read the Bible. Like the Bible study group that I'm going through is just going through Romans. And every time we read a section of we're just going, one chapter at a time every time we meet, I'll just read one verse and all of a sudden it'll hit me differently. And I'm like, oh man, I've read this verse I don't know how many times, especially in Romans, right?
Right, yeah.
And I'm like, how did I never see that before? And just to use this as a thing of, that's why you have to read your Bible. It's not, even if you read it before, it's God's word. It's not changing, but it changes. We change and always get new stuff out of it. You always find new stuff out of it.
That's right.
Anyways, had to get that in.
That's
Read your
good.
Bible.
Yeah.
So I'll read some from this. So it says, our first explicit mention of a Jewish Antichrist comes in the writings of Irenaeus, where it occurs already in tandem with the opinion that he will spring from the tribe of Dan. In Against Heresies 5:25, Irenaeus details the career of the Antichrist from 2 Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians 2, tying the notice of the Antichrist taking his seat in the temple with Christ's abomination of desolation in Matthew 24:15 from from Daniel 7.
Which ties into Thessalonians.
Right. From Daniel 7, the little horn of the fourth beast.
Mm-hmm.
And from Jesus' parable of the unjust judge in Luke 18:2, wherein the judge of the Antichrist and the widow is the earthly Jerusalem. Quote, he shall remove his kingdom into that city and shall sit in the temple of God, leading astray those who worship him as if he were Christ. Details are then taken from Daniel 8 and 9. Antichrist is John's beast from the sea, and the beast from the earth is his armor bearer. In Against Heresies 5:32, Irenaeus notes that the Antichrist will be a Danite, but he will claim the Roman power. He might just have the title Titan, a fitting name, for it, quote, contains a certain outward appearance of vengeance and of one inflicting merited punishment because he, the Antichrist, pretends that he vindicates the oppressed. That's a quote from Irenaeus.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and just if anyone is reading this section, just to kind of tie it in, I'm not sure if the sections I highlighted tie this in, but he ties this in all with the name of 666.
Oh,
so
really?
This is still
yeah.
in that same section where Irenaeus is saying like 666 is the number of the beast. This is how you calculate it, and it's all presumed that it's from the tribe of Dan. So very much, there's no misinterpreting what he is talking about, who he's talking about, and connecting it in a way.
So, and I just need to reiterate, we're not landing on this. We're simply reading what Irenaeus wrote.
Yeah.
And I'm compelled to follow it because it's making sense to me.
Right.
But obviously, if I did deeper dive, there's going to be criticisms of it, right? So, But the one thing that I was thinking of, and, I go back and forth on, will the Antichrist be a Jew or will he be a Gentile? Like what, because he actually proposes a peace deal with all the other nations, and it's going to be hard. It's hard for me to imagine that a Jew working on behalf of Israel would be able to find an agreement with, the other nations wouldn't trust him, right? So my mind goes to it would be a Gentile at that point, because somebody from the outside that they would trust that would say, okay, we'll do a 7-year peace agreement. We won't destroy Israel or whatever. But then you have the whole temple issue. You can't enter the temple. Like if they rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount, as far as a Gentile can go is the courts, the outer courts, the Gentile courts. That's it. So if he's going to go into the temple, then he would need to be a Jew, And so, unless he just forced his way in and was like, "That's it, I'm God," and he's just going to do miraculous signs and wonders, so he will deceive many.
Right. And sorry, go ahead.
But it would make it would actually pull the Jewish people into a deception much greater if he was a Jew, a fellow Jew.
Right.
Like I don't think they would follow a Gentile into idolatry like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Although historically they've done that many times in the Bible.
Right. It's not outside the realm of possibility.
Right.
But at the same time, I mean, there's going to be a one world government, so me personally, I always do land more on, like, I could see just looking around, maybe this is no surprise, but I think we're pretty close to the last days. I'm not saying it's tomorrow, but I don't know. I've always kind of said, I don't know. I don't think my generation will be the one that doesn't experience death, but like maybe my grandkids, like that's how far.
Ken says
Right, yeah.
that when the reestablishment of Israel in 1948 was when the beginning of the last days began, when they began,
Right.
the last days began. So that's been, what, 100 years? 1948 to
80 years?
80 years,
I keep
yeah.
wanting to think it's like in the 2000s.
Right.
It happened 60 years ago.
Right,
The
yeah.
90s just happened 10 years ago.
Right. So 1948, we're 80,
Right. Yeah. But my whole point about talking about, when I say we're close, I don't mean like, just sell everything, it's going to happen tomorrow. I just mean we're obviously throughout time, you're always getting closer to the end.
Right.
But
We've never been closer.
We've never been closer.
Right.
The whole point I was getting at is that looking around at contemporary politics, there are so many globalist, which is very much a leftist thing, which most secular Jews, so Jews that are through
Not
lineage,
Orthodox.
blood.
Yeah.
I mean that they're Jewish, but they maybe literally. I have most of my Jewish friends are like this, so I'll say they they celebrate Hanukkah, they don't celebrate Christmas, they eat bagels, and that's about it.
So they're
Secular Jews. Yeah. So they say, I'm Jewish, but they don't go to temple. They don't care about anything.
Yeah.
Those are very much, there are leftists. Those secular Jews just vote, Democrat. And there are tons of.
Would they be the ones that were like, abortion is the
Jewish right? Yeah,
Jewish right.
Very much so. Yeah. That's a whole other thing that we could talk about. But they're also the ones, and again, I'm just looking at contemporary politics. I could totally see a secular Jew from lineage ruling over a globalist government or a globalist thing. That's
Soros.
all. Right. I'm just saying.
George Soros. Right?
There are a lot of secular Jews that tend to lead towards this globalization.
Yeah.
That's all I'm getting at.
I mean, the Bible tells us it's going to happen, so
right.
No matter who does it.
Right.
But the key is that every nation will rise against Israel.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing kind of being put together.
Right.
That's all the horns and all that stuff.
Yeah. I was just explaining my position as I buy into that he would be a secular Jew.
Yeah.
Because it also says that he, in Daniel, it also says he's homosexual. We're just getting out of that. We've said that before.
Yeah.
But also that he will, what does it say about that he rejects the God of his fathers? Or so it sounds, if he rejects the God of his fathers, that means his fathers had a God, which would lead me to believe that he's a Jew.
Yeah. So this also brings up
lineage.
another thing too. There's a prophecy in the book of Enoch about the merging of Islam and Christianity.
Right.
And basically they built these, and it's called Chrislam or whatever, and that's been happening. I mean, the Pope just basically ratified that recently. I think it was in May. But they also built the temples of the Abrahamic religions in Saudi Arabia. And it's a Catholic, a mosque, Catholic church, a mosque, and a Jewish temple or synagogue or whatever. And they are trying to merge those three together. And to me, so I think Chrislam's the first step.
Right.
You got to get the two like brothers of, you have Abrahamic religions, you have Judaism obviously sits at the top because Abraham was the first Jew, and then you have Christianity, then you have Islam, right? And so the two branches that come out, they have to be merged, and then you can fold them underneath.
Yeah.
And that's probably when we'll see like the Noahide laws come into play,
Right.
where you can't, like where there's a death penalty for, like, it's not the same Noahide laws.
It's not the same Noah from
right. It's been revised through the years, and
yeah.
it's going to be bad. We could probably do an episode on that too, like the difference between the Noahide laws and the Noahide laws.
right. Yeah.
Right. But the Noahide laws originally from Genesis are only 7 laws. And so, and they're basically like, don't kill, it's it's a whole nother
Don't eat
episode.
blood. Yeah.
So it's what the moral standard that everyone's held to, basically,
Right.
in the world, outside of the Jews who got the 10 Commandments.
Right.
They got extra laws.
Exactly.
So, anyways, let's go back to Irenaeus.
Yeah. Okay, so it says Irenaeus knows that the Antichrist will be a Danite, but he will claim Roman power. He might just have the name Titan, a fitting name, for it, quote, contains a certain outward appearance of vengeance and one of inflicting merited punishment, because the Antichrist pretends that he vindicates the oppressed. The oppressed here are probably the Jews. Somewhat surprisingly, Irenaeus brings forth two scriptural passages in support of the Antichrist's Danite origin. The first is Jeremiah 8:16, which we read. I'll read it again. We shall hear the voice of his swift horses from Dan. The whole earth shall be moved by the voice of the neighing of his galloping horses. He shall also come and devour the earth and the fullness thereof, the city also, that they dwell therein. He finds further support for this in the omission of Dan from the list of the 12 tribes of the sealed in Revelation 7:5-7, which we started off the episode with.
Yeah.
Antichrist from the tribe of Dan then makes its first known appearance in Irenaeus, but it is in Hippolytus that he finds his most scrupulous and eloquent biographer. Hippolytus's copious description proceeds on the principle that the quote, deceiver seeks to liken himself in all things to the Son of God. As Jesus was the lion from the tribe of Judah, referring to Jacob's blessing on Judah in Genesis 4:49-9, the Antichrist will be the lion from the tribe of Dan, referring to Moses' blessing on the tribe of Dan in Deuteronomy 32:22. As Jesus is king, this Antichrist will also be a king, earthly instead of heavenly. This lion too will manifest himself as a lamb, Revelation 13:11. He will gather up the scattered sheep of Israel, as Christ has gathered his true flock, and as, quote, the Savior raised up and showed his holy flesh like a temple, so this one will, quote, raise a temple of stone in Jerusalem. All these from On Christ and the Antichrist, which is another Irenaeus writing.
Yeah.
Again, he will raise up the kingdom and the nation of the Jews in order that he may be worshipped by them as God. He will call together the Jewish people from their slavery to the Gentiles, and they will worship him as God and think he is their Christ. That's from a commentary on Daniel. So I'm going to skip down a little bit. And, So, here we get, this is where there was something else we were talking about even before we broached this topic. And this is where I was like, oh, dude, you're going to love this. This totally ties in.
All right.
This is what we were meant to talk about tonight.
45 minutes in.
Yeah. No. But I mean,
Yeah.
this whole topic that
Right.
it was on the line.
Yeah.
So it says the strongest Old Testament footing for a Danite Antichrist would have to be the mention of two passages of a serpent or serpents in close proximity to the name of Dan. Genesis 49:17 and Jeremiah 8:17. Yet the latter passage does not seem to have played any part in rabbinic comment on Dan, and Jewish exegesis of Genesis 49:16-18, Jacob's blessing of Dan, turns out to be overwhelmingly positive. Genesis 49:16-18 reads, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Oh, crap. My session.
Oh, no.
No, it's okay. I got it. Yeah. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels so that the rider falls backward. I wait for thy salvation, O Lord. The Jewish interpretation of these verses centered virtually exclusively on the figure of Samson, who, with all his faults, was more a Christ than an Antichrist figure. Even the comparison with the serpent is explained in terms of Samson's exploits against the Philistines by this other guy, Targum Onkelos, glorified by Philo through a linking with Moses's healing brass serpent.
Okay.
And even when allusion is made to the serpent in Eden in Genesis, There is no apparent disapproval. Quote, as the serpent is found among women, so was Samson the son of Manoah found among women.
Which would be Delilah.
Right.
Yeah.
As a serpent is bound by an oath, so was Samson the son of Manoah bound by an oath. Just as all the serpent's strength resides in his head, so it was with Samson. So that was a Jewish interpretation of that.
Of the Samson story?
Yeah. But it ties it in with the snakes. Mm-hmm. Samson, as the biblical text in Judges makes apparently clear, was a Danite. His father, Manoah, was a Danite. But when Jacob says that Dan will judge his people, quote, like one of the tribes of Israel, the tribe he will judge, like, is the preeminent tribe of Judah. Mm-hmm. And according to this rabbi, although Samson's father was a Danite, Samson's mother was from the tribe of Judah. Thus, in Samson, the two tribes united. In Genesis, Jacob is said to have been so impressed with Samson in his vision that he thought this prodigious warrior was the Messiah.
Wow.
Quote, but when he saw him dead, he exclaimed, he too is dead. Then I wait for your salvation, O Lord. This assertion that Samson, the great Danite, had a mother descended from Judah helps explain the saying of this other rabbi on Genesis 49:9, Jacob's blessing of Judah. Quote, this alludes to Messiah, the son of David, who is descended from two tribes, his father being from Judah and his mother from Dan, in connection with both of which lion is written. Judah is the lion's whelp, Dan is a lion's whelp. A saying which, however, cannot have been intended to refer to Samson, as the Messiah here is expressly the son of David. Thus, in the claim of a royal, Jewahite paternal descent and Danite maternal descent, we finally have a Jewish exegetical warrant for, not an Antichrist to be sure, but a Christ from the tribe of Dan. So it says, this one rabbi lived in the 3rd century, so he is too late to have been known by Irenaeus or Hippolytus, but he may have not been the one who originated this exegesis, based as it is on the obvious similarity between Jacob's blessing of Judah and Moses' blessing of Dan. Hippolytus is quite aware, as was Origen, on the interpretation of Genesis, which sees it as a reference to Samson, who was a Danite and a judge. He resists this exegesis, saying that Samson only partially fulfilled the prophecy. What is more, Hippolytus knows an exegesis of Deuteronomy 32:22, which confused someone from the tribe of Dan with the Messiah. Quote, but that no one may err by supposing that this is said of the Christ, let him carefully attend to the matter. Dan, he says, is a lion's whelp, and in naming the tribe of Dan, he declared clearly the tribe from which the Antichrist is destined to spring. For as Christ springs from the tribe of Judah, so Antichrist is to spring from the tribe of Dan.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So he does an actual pretty good breakdown, and he uses rabbinical teachings on that, which are important because, you know, like Heiser says, like we try and get in the mindset of is what was the Second Temple Jew believing, what were they taught, what were they thinking. So I wonder if when a disciple that converted from Judaism to Christianity after Revelation was written, when they get to the Antichrist, if they would have thought about that as it being from Dan.
Right. And it's the interesting point is, even though in this article, there's at the end there, he makes the point is obviously there is some allusion to some sort of Messiah that's going to come that is not who Christ ends up being.
Right.
So there.
Well, if you look at the story of Samson, which is interesting because this is an interesting altogether. I've never even heard this before, so I'm just off the top of my head. But if you look at the story of Samson, what's interesting is that he takes a vow, he breaks the vow, so he basically makes a promise and then breaks his promise, right? So it starts off with the honey, so he's not supposed to touch anything dead because he takes a Nazarene vow, right? Or Nazarene vow. And so he lets his hair grow and all that, and he's not supposed to touch anything dead. right? So he sees the lion carcass and dips his hand and gets the honey because there's a bee's nest in there, and then and also too he's with Delilah, who was a Philistine, so he was sleeping with the enemy, literally.
Yeah.
And so his figure is tortured. He ends up going, he gets his eyes plucked out, right? So there's just the whole story there. But when you think about the breaking of the vow, of the Nazarene vow, and then the Antichrist figure that we know of, he's going to make a peace treaty, and halfway through he's going to break it. Right? He's going to make a 7-year treaty, and then 3.5 years in, he's going to break it.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. And I don't know if you actually want to go into this. Did you have something you wanted to bring up? But
I just was looking at the genealogies.
Sure.
Matthews gives the genealogy of Joseph, the father, and then, but if you go to, I think it's Luke's gospel. I just want to look real quick. No, it's going to be Mark. Is it Mark's gospel? I'm just trying to find the other genealogy. No, that both. It must be. Is it? I didn't think it was John's, but maybe it is. This is weird. I should know this. It's just I haven't looked at this in a long time. Yeah, no, it's not that. All right, well, you keep talking. Let me look real quick. I'm going to find it. Because I know Matthew's gospel is Joseph's genealogy. And if I'm not mistaken, I thought it was Luke's gospel, but I didn't see it when I turned there.
well, how about I will help you out? It's in Matthew.
No, Matthew's is the father, is Joseph's genealogy, connected to David.
Oh.
There's 2 of them with genealogies. So, let's see. Oh, here it is. It is. Sorry. What? Google.
I looked it up. It's Matthew 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham.
All right. I made a huge mistake. I could have swore that Mary's genealogy was recorded as well.
Oh, let me look that up. It's in Luke.
Where is it in Luke? Because I just looked at Luke. I feel like an idiot. I teach the Bible.
I know that this is the 3rd chapter of Luke, Luke 3.
Oh, I was like, oh, yeah, there it is. Okay. So the reason I wanted
This is great podcasting. I'm so glad.
I'm going to have to cut this out, man.
No, it's all right.
The baptism and genealogy of Jesus. I didn't realize it was that far along into Luke. But when you go back, son of Levi. So he was the son of, so it was thought of Joseph, and it goes backwards. So it goes the opposite way. So you get, at the end, you get God, and Matthew's, at the beginning, you get God. It goes from God down, and this one, it goes from them backwards. So you go, let me see here, where is David, the son of Jesse, Obed, Salmon, Aminadab, Hezron, Judah, son of Judah, obviously. So they both were connected to Judah. David and Mary were both connected through Judah. So, but not with Samson. Samson was Dan and Judah.
Right.
So that's why you have that split.
Right.
And this is probably a worthless conversation at this point.
It's okay. But yeah, I also wanted to bring up, so when we originally were talking about that, you had brought up the part from 2 Peter.
Oh yeah, Second Peter. You want me to read?
So, well, I was going to bring up, this is what I was going to ask. There's an interesting, and maybe we were also started what I found something else is how
okay.
I'll say it. And I'm describing the conversation that we had and kind of our way of thinking. You started reading something from 2 Peter, and then we started looking into some other extra biblical texts that we will probably do a whole episode on, because then we got totally enthralled in reading this other book. Extra biblical. We're by no means saying it's canon,
right.
Obviously,
Well, it is included. If I'm thinking of the same book, if we're thinking of the same book, it is included in the Orthodox Ethiopian Orthodox,
right? Yeah,
as their was it apocryphal writing?
Yeah. So, but anyways, so I was gonna tee it up as we were getting super into the reading of the when we were going through that. So maybe we'll do a whole episode on that. But it's the Apocalypse of Peter, which is, again, like we said, not canon, just interesting again to think. Although some church fathers, we were trying to find why this specific book was not included in the canon. Although we were able to see that there were some church fathers who did believe it to be inspired, but the consensus was not there.
Yeah, the councils didn't
so
rule on it.
We're not making a case for that. Just an interesting piece of...
And we should probably say why. I mean, the date of the writing.
Right.
It was like 200... It was around 230
Second
or something.
AD, yeah.
So it was 150 years after Peter died. So
so
letters to just circulate through 150 years after he died, they could have been easily manipulated, even if they were original, another letter from Peter.
Right.
There's a lot of these documents floating around, by the way.
Right. Although this one in particular was one that was not, because Ken talks about this book. It's the Apocalypse of Peter.
Yeah.
Is what I'm going to just read a little section about.
Yeah.
So much in the same way, like kind of Ken broke down, obviously there are some apocryphal books that, like you said, obviously we don't think that Peter was the one who wrote it, but it wasn't dismissed like the Gospel of Thomas, like these other ones that were so clearly heretical, that like to get lumped into Enoch or these other writings that were...
It could be that he gave a sermon and someone tried to take notes in the sermon, and that became part of what was circulated through. Right. And they also, another issue is that they don't have...
This is the full document.
Yeah, they have fragments. Right. So it's hard to put it back together. And I don't think anything was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into it. Yeah. But the Dead Sea Scrolls are great because they actually have really preserved copies of things that are pre-Christian.
Right. The whole point I'm getting at, that I'm trying to just again reiterate to people that are going to listen to this that may go, "Oh, you're going to read from this apocrypha stuff, and that's all crazy nonsense."
Right.
I'm just making the point that there is a distinction between some of these crazy early writings and then something like this that was revered by at least some church fathers that made the case for it. And
it's in the canon. It's in the canon of the Ethiopian Orthodox. I mean, it's one of the oldest churches. Right. So is Enoch. Right. So, but
Anyway, I just want to make sure we cover our bases before.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, so this is the relevant teaching that goes into, again, more about the Antichrist and at least that he will be of Jewish lineage. So I'm not going to say, I'll just read it.
Yeah.
Did you not perceive the fig tree is the house of Israel? And indeed, I have told you, when its branches bud in the end, false messiahs will come, and he will promise, I am the Christ who has come into the world. And when they see his evil deeds, they will turn away. And they will reject him who is called the glory of our ancestors, who crucified the first Christ and erred exceedingly. But this liar is not the Christ. And when they resist him, he will wage war with the sword, and there will be many martyrs. Then at that time, when the branches of the fig tree, this alone is the house of Israel, have budded, there will be many martyrs by his hand, and they will die, and there will be martyrs. A lot of martyrs. Indeed, Enoch and Elijah will be sent in order to instruct them that this is the deceiver who will come into the world and perform signs and wonders to deceive it. So,
And, there's a couple instances with Jesus in the Gospels with fig trees. He curses the one. Remember, he walks up, he doesn't find any fruit on it, and he curses it. The next day it's withered, completely withered. And wasn't there something else you read about that fig tree too? Wasn't there more to that?
Yeah, I didn't want to set it up as so in the book The Apocalypse of John, which this is Peter, sorry. This is from. I read the full one.
Yeah.
And in that text, these words that I just read were quoted as saying they were coming from Jesus, who was explaining to the disciples after they asked him, "Hey, can you explain the meaning of the fig tree that you had just talked about?"
Yeah.
So that's where I was kind of going back and forth with. I don't want to say that these were the words that Christ, because I'm not attributing.
What's interesting is their tree is the olive tree, but they're known for the fig. Like, that's the thing. And what someone explained it to me, that the olive tree is obedient Israel, the fig tree is disobedient Israel. And it's interesting because whenever they're connected with the fig tree, it's always in a fruitless manner. Like, God expects fruit from it, but there is no fruit from it. And so when Israel's being sitting under judgment, it's mentioned as a fig tree. When Israel's mentioned as in obedience, as being fulfilled in the way God wants them, they're the olive tree. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Sorry. I was looking up, it is crazy. Although I couldn't remember if the figs were actually tied in with Islam, and they are.
Oh, wow.
I couldn't remember if
Interesting.
I couldn't remember if it was figs or if they were dates. But it says the fig plant is one of the fruits mentioned in the Quran, along with olives, grapes, pomegranate, bananas, and dates.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, yeah, but I mean, so that's interesting to think about. And also, too, John 15, if you remain in me and I remain in you, you'll bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. And so fruit, right? Olive trees, they have fruit too, olives, right?
Yeah.
But he's talking about remaining in him and him remaining in you. A fruitless tree, and the only way that the olive tree doesn't bear fruit is if it's not remaining in him, right? But this fig tree is like a planted tree. It's already there,
right?
It's in existence. So it's just kind of a cool maybe studies you guys might want to do when you listen, when you on their own time. But that's pretty cool. And the apocalypse of Peter, or whatever, revelation of Peter. It's kind of interesting to think about that, though, like when we were talking about Irenaeus and Hippolytus and these early church fathers, how they landed down on the Antichrist would be from the tribe of Dan.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering where it started to get buried, because, early church fathers believed in a premillennial rapture.
They were Protestants.
Yeah, they were Protestants. They weren't Catholics. They believed, I think that I like to believe that much of what my theology, my eschatology, is more in alignment with the early church fathers, which I think is important.
Yeah.
But it got buried somewhere in there, and I can, obviously we could historically look, well, when the Catholic Church really got its power.
Probably Augustine.
Yeah, Augustine. Man, I tell you, Augustine to me is not, like, I used to really, revere his writings, but I think he's done more harm than good in a lot of ways, for both Catholics and Protestants.
Yeah,
because he's the one guy that both of them look up to.
Right.
And he also was a Gnostic.
Right.
And he employed Gnostic tactics for his debates against the against in the way that he debated. Because that was a big thing back then, was these big debates. But so anyways, so I mean, Anything else? That was kind of cool, though. I mean, we looked at how possibly the Antichrist coming out of the tribe of Dan, which was spurred on by the fact that Dan was not mentioned in the 144,000 from Revelation chapter 7, and we ended up reading from the Apocalypse of Peter. That's how heresies develop. No, I'm just kidding. That's how false teaching develops. But people obviously won't agree with us on all these things. Look for it for yourself. I would recommend. I will still even though I disagree with Dr. Fruchtenbein respectively, I think that his take on it not being, the Antichrist not being from Dan, just because it wasn't mentioned, and then the way that he presents it is, in other places of Scripture they left him out. I don't know if that really carries weight with me as much.
Right, especially like we had said, I found this post all about especially like we had said, going back to Irenaeus, who was, one of the, possibly was asking questions to John.
Yeah. Early. I mean, he's an apostle, an early apostle.
Yeah.
I mean, not a big A apostle.
Right.
But definitely a church planner.
Right. So this view that we just laid out is not silly. Like there is credence behind it.
Yeah.
And it's not some pre-mill dispy, nonsense that was just made up to, I don't know.
Yeah. We'll debunk the Darby theory at some point. I mean, I was hoping Dr. Kim would get into that when he was on our podcast. And you guys should go back and listen to that, the Church Father one again. Yeah. Dead Sea Scrolls and Church Father. We're going to have him back on soon. He wanted to get through the month of September. He had a lot going on. And so I'll call him back up. We'll get him back booked on here, and we'll talk about some stuff. But anyways, so there you have it. Yeah. All Out War believes the Antichrist is from the tribe of Dan. There you go. But nobody knows because we can't determine what clan or what tribe anyone's from, anyways.
At least not now.
Not right now. So until the genetics
come around.
Yeah, Ancestry.com.
Yeah,
invest in it.
Ancestry.com was started by Mormons, by the way.
Oh.
There you go.
There you go. Even deeper rabbit hole.
Co-funded by the CIA. I'm pretty sure I remember reading that. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember hearing that too.
But yeah, I just wanted to sum it up like this. Maybe we'll leave is when you were going from, we're talking about genetical testing, and then we're talking about this, and we're talking about that, and then we end up reading from the Apocalypse of Peter. Is if anyone has ever wondered what it's like to go out to dinner. With if you wanted to sit, we go and get wings on a weekly basis. Yeah. Don't say where, don't say when or where, okay. Because
you don't want anyone showing up.
I don't want anyone showing up. But if you were to sit, or before or after we hit record,
yeah.
If you've ever wanted to know, or in our group chats, what we talk about,
yeah.
Welcome to a conversation that just happened. It starts here, goes there and there and there and there. Comes out somewhere totally
it's like else. Someone drops a bomb, like a grenade, into a thread, a group chat thread, and then all of a sudden everybody's picking up the pieces trying to figure out what they're going to say. But that was cool. That was fun.
Yeah,
that was fun. So hey, if you have any comments on that, feel free to reach out to us on Instagram or our email. We have All Out
Telegram.
Or Telegram. Yeah, go join us on Telegram, by the way. It's fun. Cool stuff.
It's the only social media I use.
Yeah.
So you can see my posts.
Yeah, if you want to see a window into Rosie's world, he runs a Telegram. You can tell. It's very different from our Instagram.
It is.
So, all right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
We'll catch you next time.
Love you.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the All Out War podcast today. If you had a blast, then we'd love to have you back for another episode, so please subscribe and leave a review. We love to hear from you. You can also follow us on Instagram at All Out War Podcast or on Twitter at AOWcast. These episodes are also available on YouTube, unless they contain a little too much truth. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.